All right, we're joined here by Nick Roche, who's the CEO of addMRR, who is a growth marketing consultancy who's had many prominent exits for B2B SaaS companies. Thank you, Nick, for joining us today.
Thanks, Alan, for having me.
Awesome. So you're big on branding. Can you tell me a little bit more about why branding is important in today's world?
Yeah, absolutely. So brand is one of those things that can't easily be replicated or stolen by any competitor or really anyone else in your market. It's very unique to you as a person. And as I feel that we're really moving into a year of authenticity as it relates to content and putting yourself out there, that also kind of ties into vulnerability and all kinds of other things. But point here being that brand is one of those things that it's so unique to you that it can't be stolen by anyone else. Your connection with your community and your audience, that is something that is absolutely priceless and can't be replicated with AI. In this day and age, we have access to tools and technology that can help you pretty much copy and paste somebody's tool just like that. And you know, what they can't do is take your audience and your community away from you. They can't take your brand away from you. That is something that is so entrenched within your DNA as a company. And that's what makes it so special. And that's why I believe so strongly that, this year more than ever is really the year of the brand.
How did this change? Like, what happened in the past to evolve into this new brand age? Why did this all of a sudden become a big thing?
Yeah, that's a really good point and question. So, you know, looking back at the past couple of decades, especially in the technology space, we've had so many unicorns and big companies that have been able to get insane valuations, even when they didn't have much revenue and things like that. But we've kind of been more corrected lately. And it's now, 2023 was a tough year for many people in the B2B SaaS space. And many people in general, just across different industries, it was a tough year. And this comes on the back of the pandemic as well, which really changed things up with respect to remote work and all of these other things that happen in the world. So, looking at 2024, and now with all of the release of, we had a ChatGPT come out and OpenAI in the past couple of years, as well as many other new AI tools. And this really just changes the game a lot, in terms of just coming on the back of these more corrected valuations, what's going on with investors. And now looking at 2024, it's like, what can be unique about a product? And, we're also seeing some of the influences from other spaces, like just, what's going on with podcasts, with some other people in the business space as well. Like, for example, what comes to mind is somebody like Sam Parr, who has My First Million podcast. Seeing what he's done, being able to sell to HubSpot and then go build a podcast. Other creators like Sahil Bloom, Justin Welsh also come to mind with respect to this space and how it's influencing the SaaS community as well. But Naval said a long time ago something along the lines of the best tech companies are media powerhouses, and I do think that's just becoming more and more true as time goes on.
And how about for yourself? Like, how has your thinking evolved in terms of brand given your own journey? How you
Yeah,
started off and
so
look today? Yeah.
yeah, so you know, uh, earlier on, I think it was not something I understood that well. I just was like, hey, I'm going out there trying to reach out to clients, and I didn't really pay a lot of attention to how I was branding myself and even how those little micro interactions still comprise your brand, the language you use, the way that you reach out to somebody, and how many times you follow up, what kind of cadence you have, and everything like that. But, as I started paying more attention to kind of like just the whole concept of a brand in terms of not only things that are obvious like a logo or design and things like that, but more so just the experience of the brand and the emotions that people feel and the way that your presence can make, like, as your presence as a company, how that can make other people feel when they interact with you, both on an external side, like if they're just viewing your, let's say, your profile on a social media platform, like they're looking through your content, but also how do they feel when they enter some kind of internal sales process? How do they feel after they become a customer? I started thinking a lot more about things like that. I started thinking about, for example, how, you might go to a luxury jeweler. Perhaps you're celebrating some kind of milestone, buying a gift or something. You go in and you have this experience. I started thinking, how can I provide that kind of experience to my customers? Because I felt that it was very important to distinguish ourselves. And that was kind of something that when I had that realization, I couldn't turn back. And it became an obsession of just trying to constantly elevate the experience.
Yeah, it's the way of distinguishing yourself. I don't know if you read the book um, by Seth Godin, Purple Cow.
Yeah. That's a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
what we based our entire company around when we first started, actually. So notice
Nice.
that Wormley's purple cow, and Max, one of the tenets that he lives by is try to be different in all areas of life and everything that he does. And so it's definitely served us very well, and I could see it being more and more important, especially as you said, when tools like ChatGPT and all these open source libraries can make anything available to be built. And so then the question is, what can you do to differentiate from your competitor?
Exactly.
So on that topic, what can companies these days do to differentiate? How do they build a brand? Where do they start?
Yeah. So I think that it starts with the company values and kind of the non-negotiables, which, you're just talking about with Max. It's like that started with one of his tenants, or, maybe a few of your tenants, where you're like, okay, these are the core principles. And then I think that the brand comes around those core principles, because even as companies grow and evolve over time, usually those core principles are pretty solid in the foundation. And that can be a framework for so many things, not just brand, but even hiring and other important aspects of business. But as it relates to brand, your core principles kind of guide the direction in which you want to build your brand. So to get more specific, you might have a specific set of values and your core principles, and then from there you can start looking at what kind of experience should people have when they come to us. And depending, like, for example, your one of your core values might be that you want to be the most affordable option out there, let's say, because you care about that. And then, that kind of can relate to things like pricing, but it can also relate to the logo and more of those visual elements. And then you can also, in your content, for example, maybe this is an important subject for you to be educating your customers about. Thinking of a random industry example like HVAC. There's a lot of people, especially seniors, that might be getting taken advantage of. Perhaps there's people going door to door trying to charge them like thousands of dollars that they can't afford. And maybe in this case, the company is very passionate about the type of stuff that's going on in the industry and trying to revolutionize and change that. And perhaps, like, if that is something that is really important to the brand, then that also can be reflected in so many other different aspects.
No, definitely. And how about for startups who are just starting to figure out their customer, and you know how the startup journey is, like you're pivoting constantly, you're trying new things, you're finding your market. Can you even establish a brand at this stage? And if so, how would you go about doing it?
Yeah, for sure. So for startups, I would say you can establish a brand, but as you mentioned and alluded to, it's one of those things that can change and evolve very quickly just because you're going out and getting feedback. That's
Mhm.
why I would recommend to just keep it pretty simple. I think, kind of having a more fluid and flexible type of brand. Perhaps you've chosen a name, perhaps you have some marketing collateral that's been pushed out. And that kind of gives you some wiggle room. Like if you just have some basic, let's say you have a text logo or just like some very basic colors, like you haven't really chosen a lot of things with respect to the visual elements of your brand. And
Mhm.
then with respect to all of the other things, like, a website, your outbound messages, your inbound communications, all of those things, going as ad hoc as possible with respect to just how you feel that it should be done, and then just making small adjustments and tweaks over time. I think it's the most simplistic way to go about it, because you don't want to expend a lot of energy and resources trying to create this identity around something that doesn't really exist yet. And as
Mhm.
time goes on, you kind of get feedback. You get into a feedback loop where perhaps you have a certain way of communicating with your prospects and you notice that they don't actually like that, or maybe things change over time and something that was working well, they're no longer receptive to. Especially for saturated markets, things can change quickly. So with time, you'll be able to know what stands the test of time. But
Mhm.
just to start, I recommend just keeping everything pretty simple, making small adjustments, and then being able to just let the market dictate some feedback, and you can make those adjustments on the fly.
What I found very interesting about brand is that it's not necessarily what you want to see in the world, although that's not the full picture either. It is what your customers want to see. So with all the brand archetypes that we see out there, from ruler to magician to all that, it's what's going to resonate with your customer. But at the same time, it's also a piece of your identity too. So if you want to create something truly, then again, nothing is truly original, but unique to you and your company, then you have to inject some of your own special sauce in there as well.
Yes,
So just
definitely.
curious
Yeah.
from your perspective, how have you thought about building your own brand or the brand for addMRR?
Yeah. So we ended up pivoting. We were more of an operations as a service company. We wanted to get our hands dirty with respect to some, uh, I don't know. Yeah, maybe like we could say small size SaaS companies, or maybe even like mid size SaaS companies. We wanted to get our hands dirty, get into some operations. We had a couple of clients in various verticals in the SaaS space who needed help with their operations, and especially our focus was on marketing and sales, kind of like RevOps type of situation. So we were working with these companies, and we had more of a brand around operations, and we learned from experience that we really enjoyed specifically RevOps or sales and marketing related functions within that operation space. And that's when we wanted to pivot to change the brand a little bit. We used to be called Star Integration, which was more operations focused. And then when we realized the most value that we were creating was through the revenue side, not just other departments like retention. I still believe it's important, but we focused on retention, customer lifetime value, and other things as well, which made us more general. But we wanted to really hone in on the revenue side. And then, I kind of thought to myself, well, what is like a simple and clear way to communicate what we do and how we help people, and in a very simple and short form way. And I started thinking about words and mapping all of that out, and addMRR came out. And I also liked how it has only 4 letters, because add has 2 D's and MRR has 2 R's. So it just felt very simplistic.
Mhm.
All the domains were available, and I think it kind of also ended up fitting because a couple of 1 to 2 years later, in that time frame, it felt that a lot more people were kind of like talking about MRR, and it felt like very relevant and on trend at a certain point. So it felt very cool. It felt like something that fit and felt like it was resonating with the market just in terms of the actual name.
Yep.
And then as for the websites and logos and everything like that, that really just evolved over time. And I think it's still evolving over time. But yeah, I think we're positioning ourselves more now as a little bit different. Like when we started, I think we were more like brute force, especially for startup. Like we're
Mhm.
gonna like come in and do all these like crazy growth hacks and help you guys grow your company, and even take you from like 0 to 5K MRR and take you to like 30 to 50 and beyond. That was
Fun.
kind of like where we came in at. And now I think we've refined a little bit, and a little bit more of a sophistication, and working with bigger companies that might already have a marketing team, but perhaps just need a partner like us to come in and own a specific function. So that's kind of like to give you a little insight on the evolution over time. But I think things are still definitely changing and ebbing and flowing with time. But that's kind
Yeah.
of where we're at right now.
I mean, I do like the name addMRR. It's very simple. It's SEO friendly when people search for you. I mean, it's also like a keyword. Like, how do I add
Yeah.
MRR? So the branding is really smart there. I mean, I've been doing a lot of stuff on content, written content especially. So I can definitely appreciate the name and how important that is.
Yeah, for
So,
sure. Thanks.
very well done there. And you said even your client base has evolved as you guys have increased in sophistication. What are some of the things that companies don't quite understand about how to do growth, especially in this day and age?
Yeah, so it kind of ties into what we're talking about a lot. I think brand for sure is something that many, especially tech companies, struggle with. A lot of them are really focused on product, which is, of course, extremely important as well. That said, I think a lot of them don't really pay full attention to the brand and the marketing side in general. But I would also say, as it relates to content, and a lot of people, when I say content, they think it's just SEO and blogs, which again is important itself. But when I say content, they don't even recognize that I mean video content a lot of the time, or short forms, long forms, all of that. So I would say content is super neglected and
Hmm.
something that people tend to struggle with, especially technical folks in the space. Like if there's like a technical founder, typically they are not paying attention to this too much. They don't really think it matters sometimes. But yeah, I would say that's definitely the top thing that folks need to pay more
Hmm.
attention to.
And so, how does for example, maybe a technical team or someone who's not as attuned to video content, how would they get started? Do they focus on product demos? Do they do talking head videos, interview podcasts? How do you think about the framework for that?
Yeah, I think the best thing to do is to set a habit and just to sit down at least once a week, but ideally more. At least once a week, block out an hour, sit down and talk about subjects that are important to you. You can do it either just like a stream of consciousness type of thing where
Hmm.
you're sitting down and talking about whatever is on your mind, kind of like a video diary. Or another format could be you have a bunch of subjects prepared. You can just go through your list, start
Hmm.
with the first one or whichever one speaks to you the most, talk about it, and then come back to your list and talk about another subject. Building that habit and building those skills is what's going to get you over the hump because inevitably talking to a camera for the first time is a little bit intimidating. But with time and being able to build those skills, you will feel more comfortable. And when you feel more comfortable and can talk about things with ease, then people will also be more interested in your content as well. Because if you just sit down and you start shooting something and it's a little bit awkward, I mean, I think we all kind of have to go through that phase anyways. It's very intimidating and it can put a lot of people off. They're like, I don't want to have to be bad at something and show other people that I'm a bit bad at it at first. But think about the compounding effect of doing this like 365 days in a row. I
Hmm.
mean, I think everyone has to go through the journey, and it's you only will be a beginner at that thing once in your life. Once you get over that stage, you will never be worse than like your first day of doing it. So I think that's something that we kind of have to just get over. This brings me to an important memory in my life when I had dropped out of university and I went into door to door sales because it was the only job I could get, which is kind of how I started this whole career trajectory. But I remember going into, I had done all the training and we'd been doing probably at least a week of training.
Hmm.
And I was finally out there and it was B2B. So I was going to, the first door was a pizza shop. I had to go in and pitch. We were doing telecom. So I had to pitch telecom to this guy. And I was trying to remember all the things in my head, like, okay, we got to do an intro, short story, uh, the presentation. And I was trying to like go through all the steps to remember in my head. I got into the door and I just forgot how to talk. Like I didn't, I was
Right.
bumbling. I had no idea what I was talking about. It was like just super embarrassing, but I had my team lead there with me. He kind of was just like, yeah, he's new and he was just explaining what's going on and talking also and trying to help me. Eventually, I kind of got the hang of it. The first door was really bad. Went into the second door. It was a little bit better, still pretty bad. The third door, so on and so forth. And by the end of that day, I felt like a huge improvement by the end of the day. I was like, well, I feel like I'm getting the hang of this, talking to so many people and that it was just a skill that I had to build, but I did have to get through that first door and it was extremely painful and I felt so humiliated, embarrassed, everything, but I had to get through that. And I ended up being the top rep in Canada out of over 5,000 people in the organization within 3 months. So it was a big jump from like my first day all the way to receiving this award on stage and stuff, which was really cool. But you know, it just kind of it goes to show that everybody has to start from somewhere. So don't be
Hmm.
afraid to just make the first video. Just like take the first step for any given thing.
And where would you recommend people post on? I guess really where the audience is, huh?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tricky one to give generalized advice for, but I would say if you're like typically where your audience is and you're probably already kind of making content for it. Some people, for example, they are posting a little bit on LinkedIn, but maybe they're just not taking it as seriously. They're just maybe sometimes people post, random updates about their job or little company things here and there, but they
Mm.
may not be taking it a lot more seriously in terms of their personal brand, making video content, making all kinds of different content like carousels and long text posts that are more vulnerable, things like that. So, you know, I think even if you are making some content, there's probably a way to elevate and continue and do it to a bigger extent in order to really achieve your longer term goals. So yeah, it's really wherever your audience is, and then also you might, depending on your stage, you might also be trying to experiment with a new channel. Perhaps let's say, for example, you've never posted on YouTube before, but all of a sudden you decided that you do want to take YouTube seriously and start growing a channel, either for yourself or for your company.
Yep, makes total sense. One thing, Nick, that I've noticed about you is your content is very high quality. And so the way I think about it is like repetition is good, but always also improve your content. So every
Yes.
episode, hopefully, the goal is to be a little bit better than the last episode. And so how did you think about that? How does one person maybe get to be where you are today in content creation?
Yeah. So, it's it kind of a little bit comes back to what I was saying about just building the habit because, I could probably find some old videos that were pretty bad. I used to make videos even as a growth consultant, and I think they were like, looking back on it, it's one of those things you like look at your past self and it's a bit cringe, but at the same time I was trying and I was doing what I could with what I had. So, but yeah, I mean, there's always ways to incrementally improve. So perhaps, if you have an existing camera and perhaps you want to set some kind of goal for yourself to upgrade your production quality or upgrade your tools that you're using, I think that's a really good way to take it more seriously. Like, I remember I got this mic a few years ago, and I remember it made me feel very serious when I was hopping on Zoom calls, or it felt like it was more of a thing that it just registered in my mind, like feels very serious and I'm taking these things seriously. So that can be something, but it's, I don't want it to be one of those things where it's like, hey, just, go shell out thousands of dollars and just start upgrading your equipment, because it's not like, I don't want that to be an excuse or something that gets in the way for people as
Mhm.
well. It's not always about, you just have to spend more money on it, but I think in a way, like, that can help, but at the same time I think it's really just about making use of what you have, and then slowly over time you can start taking piece by piece, maybe look at the lighting, and then down the road you can look at your visuals, like your camera, the audio, and different aspects like that. But I think video quality is a pretty easy one to change. Like,
Mhm.
even on a very small budget, you can upgrade your camera quality pretty well with what's on the market today. So I think video is a good place to start, and then lighting probably after that, and audio, I would say, probably the third one.
Any products you would recommend? I know this is an endorsement, but
Yeah, yeah, sure. I'm not like an Amazon affiliate, guys, just so you know.
sure.
So, I'll
I'm just
show
here for
my
consulting.
camera. So, this is a Sony A7R3. They have an A7R5 out on the market right now, but this is really overkill, to be frank. I bought this camera for photography purposes, and sometimes I use it for my content as well, but it's a little bit serious. But they have other models that are more suitable for this type of function, like just on your computer. But
Mhm.
this is a great camera for also when I want to go and take some amazing pictures of whatever. I like to go out into nature sometimes and take photos or uh, make other videos as well. So it's good for the stuff that I like to do. But they also make some more entry level models, which are great as well. This is the Shure SM7B. This is a very good high quality microphone that you see also used on podcasts a lot. So, this is the real deal, but they also have some other models again that are more entry level, and I think that they also connect with more simple cables because this is a little bit more of a complex setup.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and for lighting, I have in front of me a key light. It's from Elgato. So I would say that those are some of the good ones. But if you're getting started, the microphones from Blue are also really good. They're like $100, and they do the job pretty well. And then also, if you want to have a budget-friendly option for webcam, I think Logitech makes some
Yeah.
pretty good entry-level webcams that are 1080p or maybe even 4K for a
Mhm.
reasonable price. And also, Shure makes, I think it's MV7 or something like that. Their microphone that I think it plugs in by USB. That's probably like $250, or you might be able to find it on sale for a little bit less. But if not those, then the Blue microphone is like $100. So hopefully those are some recommendations that can help people get started.
I think it's actually really important to know about these things. I haven't thought about it enough on my end, but I noticed that for a lot of short form video content, especially, the engagement rate is like a second or two
Oh yeah.
before they drop off and they scroll to the next thing. So you really just have like a second or two to make an impression. And if that's the case, then video quality, sound quality, all these things, they start to add up.
Oh yeah.
Um, so once you get past the first or second, you've captured your audience. What about improving how you create engaging content? How have you thought about that over the periods?
Yeah. So what I like to do is I like to study from people who are clearly successful with that.
Mm.
So that could be going on Instagram and finding some people that are creating content. And especially, I try to look at it from multiple angles. Like, you might want to look at somebody that makes content in more of like a streamer style, just to know, like, why do people watch this? Because there's some elements of it that you can bring into business content. You might not, copy it verbatim, but there are elements there that are interesting and engaging. Like, I think a lot of the times we tend to categorize, and I do this too, this like B2C, B2B thing and all that. But at the end of the day, people and human psychology as a whole is really important to understand. And as it relates to video content and why our brain will want to stop on this video versus continue scrolling, like all of that has similarities and things that you can take from everything. So, I'll look at some streamers and see like what are they doing that's interesting and how can I bring this into like a client's business or content. And then I'll also look at people who are making engaging short form videos as well, and you know, um, see how they're keeping people on the hook. And I'll notice that in the delivery too. Like, usually they'll have a hook which introduces the piece of content to keep somebody interested. And then sometimes they'll have a rehook, which is something that takes away, like, it's basically like handling an objection. So for example,
Mm.
my hook, just to give a relevant example, my hook could be how to create compelling content, and then my rehook could be without spending $5,000. So that can keep somebody like that. If somebody wants to scroll away, like, oh yeah, I don't have all that money, like whatever. And then before they
Mm.
do that, I give them a reason to stay. And then it goes on to the content. And I find that thinking about things from a standpoint of how can I make each sentence short, simple, catchy, and kind of like punchy a little bit. Just these short sentences. And I think you don't have to necessarily do that when you're creating content. Like, you might have a bit of a framework in your mind for how you want to say things, but that can also be done in the editing process. You just have to make sure that at some point in time you're saying these sentences that can be kind of clipped up.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I think that's a really good way to look at it. But I study these things from people who are getting a lot of engagement and having successful short form content, basically.
I really, really like that, actually. The handling the objection after you create your first hook. Because it's so easy to say, like, oh, this is a problem, this is the solution, result, it works. And then the next thing that comes to their mind is like, yes, but, yes, but, yes, but. But if you can handle the but, then they kind of lean in a little bit more, like, oh, this person has definitely thought of that. I mean, it works in sales, it works in short form video, I'm sure. This is a great topic. So do you have a framework at which you try to create the videos? You mentioned that you clip it, which this is the problem, the solution, the hook, the objection handling, and then what about the other pieces?
Yeah, so what comes in between is usually just opinion based, or it could be, if you're educating somebody, then it could be based on facts as well. But it would just depend on the subject. So if you're talking about something opinion based, like why you like to wear a black dress shirt on podcasts, like you can just talk about why you believe that's true. But if it's more fact based and you're just telling or educating the audience, then you can kind of give your argument, so to speak, and just talk a few sentences and say a few things, and then that can just be clipped up. Like you can honestly ramble a little bit and just talk about the subject as if you were talking to a friend. And then when that gets cut up, the editors or your creative director or whoever's kind of seeing how the video will look best in the end result, then they can kind of decide how to do it. But yeah, my insight on that process or that kind of post production side of things is that typically you have that hook, that rehook, and then it's usually just a few sentences, and that's explaining kind of like the answer to your question when you said the hook. So if you're talking about something, you have like a few sentences that talks about it, and then towards the end, you kind of want to summarize a little bit as well as maybe open up some things for people to talk about in the comments, or just open up the discussion or the floor a little bit more, invite them to some kind of CTA, like comment below, or like let me know something that they think. And then sometimes people, if it's a very polarizing subject, people don't even need the invitation or call to action to do that. They'll just want to talk about it, which is good. So, I think when especially it comes to business, you don't want to be overly polarizing. This can be more seen in B2C content where people don't really mind too much if they're giving a strong opinion. But, for businesses, we want to also be mindful that we don't want to turn away like too many people. I think it is good to turn away the wrong people, but we don't want to offend anybody or go too strong with opinions that aren't really necessary in the business context per se.
I like that last comment a lot, actually, because all too often right now, B2B is trying to borrow from B2C. It feels like it's a little bit lagged. It's just a matter of time before the short form video content, the YouTube Reels, the TikTok, it's going to move over to B2B. Is there anything else that B2B
Oh yeah.
companies should be wary of? Like you mentioned before, maybe be wary of how polarizing your content. Anything else?
Yeah, be aware of your content. You want it to be somewhat polarizing for engagement, but not overly polarizing to alienate your audience or anything like that. I think also being aware of perhaps what customers expect when it comes to your content. So for example, you may have a weekly series, like perhaps you want to create a weekly series, and you want to have, let's say you want to talk about the same subject on a certain day of the week or something like that. Setting those expectations for your audience can be very helpful, because then they know which frequency to expect. And this is also something that's borrowed from B2C, but is so relevant with B2B. If you have an ongoing series where you talk about the same thing, it creates more of a brand within your content, which is very interesting. Also, something to keep in mind is that with company content, it doesn't necessarily just need to be this faceless thing. Like some people think the company content is just like boring quotes, or like they kind of think about it in a older way that social media was done. Like if you think about a company Instagram profile and it just being a bunch of like blase text posts or something like not that fun. So when you think about company content, think about all of the faces in your company. How can you make your company profile look like somebody is coming into your office and visiting and talking to a bunch of people? So that can be an interesting thing as well, because you can have different departments making content. I think that sometimes we tend to say, oh, well, content that's for marketing, or that's just for that department or that segment of the company. But how can we show what's going on in engineering? How can we show what's going on in different segments of the company? It's very interesting to see. Like it's almost like a tour of your company. Like if your company, maybe your company doesn't have an office, or maybe they do, but it would be like coming into your company office and chatting with everybody and having engaging conversations and interesting conversations in every single office or department. So I think that's a cool way to look at the company page and just think about how can everybody kind of get involved with this. And that's, I think, a very futuristic way to look at content right now for companies.
That is really good insight for any company out there, actually, because from the marketing perspective, it's really the head of marketing who's curating all the content from their own perspective. But every department has their own story to tell and their own perspective, and they go very deep on the topic too. Head of engineering, head of CS. But it's funny that marketing is the person that usually curates, builds, creates the content, and that's what's shown out in the world, and that's what people see. So you can expand the surface area, the richness of your company, and how it's branded by just having interviews, like a company podcast. It's a great idea.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And I see some companies doing that right now, but there's not very many. I
Mhm.
think I could probably think of one or two. So it's still very open for opportunity. There's so many different verticals that haven't even come close to thinking about this.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things that might even, for some industries take years for them to start actually saying, okay, we're going to do this. But I think for the early adopters, there will be a lot of benefits, especially if down the road you're trying to explain to an investor why they should bet on you versus somebody even who might have slightly better metrics. I think that the brand will triumph and come out strong in terms of the criteria that people are looking for when it comes to these things. So yeah, I do really kind of ties back to full
Yeah.
circle to what we were talking about in the beginning, but I do feel so strongly about brand content and just shaping the future of SaaS.
Brand is paramount, and so is content. And if people want to learn more about how to reach you, how to learn about addMRR, is there anywhere they should go to talk, to learn more?
Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn, Nick Roche. You can find me on LinkedIn. Our website is addMRR.com. You can check us out there as well.
Awesome. Nick, thank you very much for coming on, and hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Alan. You too.